Why have British prime ministers been dropping like flies? Keir Starmer is the latest to fall. We look at who and what comes next, the leader in waiting, and the news outlets lying in wait. Albanians and their inflatable flamingos hit the streets. They're out to stop a Trump-related luxury resort from being built on land that is supposed to be protected. And Argentina, a notorious dictatorship, gets a new face.
La historia debe ser completa y rigurosa.
Through an official attempt to rewrite the country's history. In the 10 years since voters in the United Kingdom chose to leave the European Union, they have had 6 prime ministers. They're about to get their 7th. Keir Starmer will exit 10 Downing Street, having never quite connected with the public or large sections of the country's news media. Andy Burnham, his likely successor, is being sold as a different kind of Labour leader, better placed to reconnect with the working-class voters that Starmer's Labour government has been losing to a far-right party, Reform UK. Whether Burnham represents real change is another story. This is his second stint at Westminster, and in his first, he mostly towed the party line, including on key policy matters like the Palestine-Israel issue. Plus, Burnham will be dealing with a media landscape that keeps getting more conservative. Since Brexit, channels like GB News have been launched, amplifying Reform and its leader, Nigel Farage, and ideas once considered fringe have moved into the media mainstream. So, as Burnham prepares to take power, the question isn't just about whether he's up to the job, it's about what he's up against. 10 Downing Street could do with a renovation, the addition of a revolving door. The UK is now on the verge of getting its 7th Prime Minister in the 10 years since the Brexit referendum. Even the Postal Service has been tracking this story, as has the online commentariat, with a little help from AI.
David Cameron resigned because of Brexit, Theresa May resigned because of Brexit, Boris Johnson resigned because of scandal, Liz Truss resigned because the markets crashed after her mini-budget, Rishi Sunak wasn't in office for very long. At the moment, the time that is given to Prime Ministers to actually deliver results is very small.
10 years ago, the referendum to pull out of Europe was a disaster. It split the country, it made politics very bitter. And that's the reason why parties have elected rather extreme leaders and then they've been rapidly thrown out. And we hope it might be coming to an end, but you can't be sure.
Keir Starmer's resignation paves the way for Andy Burnham, who has just stepped down as the mayor of the northern city of Manchester. Burnham has descended on Westminster, enjoying the kind of media hype that Starmer could never generate.
Really, people's voices have changed. They're sounding a bit more upbeat.
A career politician, he is a better communicator than Starmer, a former lawyer who struggled in front of the cameras. Burnham is no stranger to Westminster politics. He spent more than 15 years in Parliament, mostly in the days of Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. He returns facing challenges galore, including the rise of the far-right Reform Party and its leader, Nigel Farage, who benefits from the British media landscape, the majority of which also leans right. Job 1 for Burnham will be reconnecting his Labour Party to its working-class base, which Starmer alienated after what looked like a landslide election win just 2 years ago, in 2024.
Why did Keir Starmer fall from office so quickly and so abruptly? He won a landslide with just 34% of the vote because the vote was fragmented across a number of parties. So it was described as a loveless landslide.
Basically, he chose to govern with the same methodologies and structures which the outgoing Tories had done. He sought the same alliances with the far-right mainstream media, particularly the Murdoch media, which the Tories had had. He inherited that oligarchical system. He chose to make deals with massively rich donors rather than the working people who back Labour, the trade unions and so forth.
Will we see Andy Burnham reset the Labour Party, and will he move in a completely different direction? We will know the answer to that based off of who he puts in his cabinet. That will tell us. Right now, we do not know what Andy Burnham's policy positions are very clearly.
There will be no shortage of news outlets chasing Burnham down for answers, particularly those on the political right. Most of the UK print sector is in the hands of Conservatives. Owners like Rupert Murdoch, papers such as The Times, tabloids like The Sun. The German conglomerate Axel Springer recently acquired another right-leaning British institution, the Daily Telegraph. The last 5 years have also seen the launch of 2 new conservative news channels, the Murdoch-owned Talk TV and the even more right-wing GB News. Channels that have allowed conservative politicians, including Nigel Farage and Jacob Rees-Mogg, to host their own current affairs programs.
And it's now been confirmed that asylum seekers and foreign nationals are involved in a, quote, significant proportion of live police investigations into rape gangs.
They are taking advantage of rules that the British broadcast regulator Ofcom has refused to tighten. Although Ofcom has fined GB News £100,000 for breaking its standards on impartiality. We contacted GB News for a comment, but did not hear back.
I don't think you can discount that the leader of Reform UK is a highly paid presenter on GB News. GB News is working as a mouthpiece for Reform UK.
And all the Prime Minister can do is say, let's do a deal with this murderous regime in Iran. You know what I think? I think the man's a coward.
There are journalists on there that do try and hold Reform politicians to account.
It is not a proper, democratic, transparent political party.
How can you say
it
that
is a
when people are
company run by one man.
They ask tough questions, but the reality is the leader of Reform UK is a presenter on GB News, and therefore he is able to use GB News to amplify his views, his policy positions to a lot of people.
Should all of them go to prison for a bit to stop the votes? Tweet #Farage on GB News.
We've always had strong broadcasting laws to say you cannot broadcast biased news, and GB News is heavily biased.
Schools and universities across the country remain beholden to toxic, illiberal identity politics or wokeism.
Ofcom, the regulator that's supposed to ensure it, hasn't ensured it at all. Now that there's a new chair of Ofcom, we may see them being treated a bit more harshly. If you want strong right-wing views, you've got to have strong left-wing views as well. That's what the broadcasting law says. And maybe at last we'll get that law obeyed.
Look at the Telegraph, look at the Murdoch media, GB News. They promote vicious tropes where immigrants are causing the problems in this country.
With up to 10 million people of working age not active in the economy and reliant on benefits, it is deeply irresponsible, it is insane.
The real problems are failures of public services, failures of politicians. It's happening around the globe. The emergence of a bigger and bigger divide between the super rich and ordinary people. But that isn't the tale which is told in Britain's oligarch media. And you can see why the oligarch media doesn't present it, because the problem is the oligarchs.
Once it becomes official and Andy Burnham is made Prime Minister, he will be saddled with some of Keir Starmer's baggage, primarily Starmer's handling of the genocide in Gaza. Starmer initially refused to object to Israeli war crimes there, before eventually coming around on some policies, such as backing the idea of a Palestinian state.
The United Kingdom formally recognises the State of Palestine.
Yet the British military continues to fly reconnaissance flights in support of Israel. The arms keep flowing, and police in the UK are still arresting protesters for showing even tacit support for Palestine Action, an activist group banned by Starmer's government. For his part, Andy Burnham has long been a member of Labour Friends of Israel, a lobby group that Israel's critics say has had far too much influence on the party. And Burnham has just announced that James Purnell, a former chair of Labour Friends of Israel, will be his chief of staff.
Are we likely to see any changes in Gaza policy if Andy Burnham becomes the leader? I would be very surprised if there are any significant changes there. Burnham might be of the view that Starmer didn't quite get the balance right and at times may have been too inclined towards Israel, but I think any changes are going to be at the margins, not fundamental.
One of the reasons why British politics has been so slow to respond to Gaza is that the questions aren't asked by the mainstream media, because the mainstream media are sympathetic to Netanyahu.
I believe, given the scale of what Hamas did on October the 7th, Israel, they're entitled to defend themselves with force.
Okay, excellent.
But with Burnham, those questions are going to be put to him, and he will have to develop a way of dealing with them, and I think that will involve serious changes in policy. And if he doesn't do that, he will descend into the same slough of despond as the hapless Starmer.
Before he was Prime Minister, Starmer made a comment that Israel had the right to cut off water supply and electricity to Gaza.
Cutting off power, cutting off water.
Well, I think that Israel does have that right.
My phone started pinging non-stop from Labour MPs saying, I cannot believe our leader has just said this, because he'd endorsed a war crime. And we got this really weird scenario where grannies holding up placards were being arrested. And a lot of progressive voters had decided to no longer vote for the Labour Party. They highlighted Gaza as being a key reason why they changed their position.
For more than 3 weeks now, protesters have been taken to the streets of the Albanian capital, Tirana. They are out to stop a luxury resort that is being built on protected land and backed in part by Donald Trump's family. And this story has as much to do with how it's being told as what's actually happening. Ryan Coles is here with more.
The project is enormous, a $5.8 billion luxury resort backed by Donald Trump's son-in-law, businessman Jared Kushner, and his wife, Ivanka Trump. It is planned partly on a protected coastal reserve in southern Albania. The development has been in the works for years, but it came into national view in May after demonstrators clashed with private security guards at the site and then took their protests to the Capitol. The demonstrations have become known as the Flamingo Revolution, named after the birds on the wetland the developers want to build over. Protesters are contesting the project itself, but also the way it has been packaged and sold. In a podcast clip that's gone viral online, Ivanka Trump talked up the project.
We were on a friend's boat and we stopped for a swim. Effectively, that's how we found it. Over the course of many years, we developed the opportunity to help realize its potential and transform it, but with a lot of restraint and care because the land is so beautiful.
The Albanian government is on good terms with the Trump administration and wants to keep it that way. Mainstream Albanian media have barely clocked the story. The exception has been a single local newsroom, Reporter.al, which traced the project through a chain of Dutch shell companies and named the figures behind it. Albanian Prime Minister Edi Rama has taken his fight, in most part, to the foreign press, granting at least 5 international interviews this month while refusing to meet the protesters at home. It has not gone well.
So let me just clarify. The project's not going ahead, sir?
It's not, again, there is not a project yet. And again, it's not, there's not a project. So you want to listen to me or you want only to speak?
A prime minister who is reluctant to face his own citizens is losing the argument with the world's press. And the protesters, tired of waiting to be covered, have started covering themselves through live streams, memes, and a sea of inflatable flamingos.
Thanks, Ryan. Over the last few years, one Latin American country after another has voted in right-wing, populist, often polarizing leaders. Names like Bukele, Milei, Cast. And just this past week, Abelardo de la Espriella in Colombia. Typically, their brand of conservatism promises a decisive break from what they call the woke agenda of the political left. In Argentina, 50 years after a military coup ushered in one of Latin America's most brutal dictatorships, President Javier Milei is looking to rewrite the narrative around that state-sponsored campaign of terror. Milei is gutting institutions dedicated to archiving or investigating the story of that dictatorship. The Listening Post's Tarek Nafa now on discourse that downplays the crimes of the past and the online voices that have moved from the margins of Argentinian society to a central place in the culture wars of the new far right.
Sitting behind the electoral success of a wave of right-wing leaders in Latin America is a sprawling transnational network of far-right influencers, YouTubers, and commentators.
Prácticamente todo el mundo hoy tiene acceso a un teléfono de estos, otorgándonos el título a todos y cada uno de nosotros de pequeños brazos armados en defensa de la causa de la libertad.
Across the region, these figures are fighting what they call a cultural battle to reclaim the past. In Argentina, a push is underway to revise the record of military rule in the country.
Durante mucho tiempo se ocultó una parte de la historia y se impuso una verdad absoluta. No había nadie que se le animara.
These arguments have also found appeal among a younger generation, which grew up surrounded by corruption scandals and economic crises, with no memory of the region's history of dictatorship.
Javier Milei and his vice president Victoria Villarruel are engaged in a battle over memory, and one of the most important figures who informs the official narrative about the past is Agustín Laje.
La idea era completar la historia para las generaciones que no vivimos la época, que se montó sobre un relato mentiroso sobre los años 70, un relato totalmente distorsionado.
He's not a government official, but his videos, articles, books, and speeches are part of the intellectual environment of the government.
El entorno intelectual del gobierno.
Javier Milei ha visto en mi trabajo.
What Javier Milei found in my work is a confrontation with the woke agenda. The right has always neglected culture, and within culture, history plays a fundamental role. George Orwell wrote in 1984, "Who controls the present controls the past, and who controls the past controls the future." In other words, control over a historical narrative has a decisive political impact. But the right, usually focused on economics, has entirely ceded that field to the left. That ended with Javier Milei. Milei brought culture to the center of the discussion.
La cultura al centro de la discusión.
This year marks the 50th anniversary of the military coup that ushered in the dictatorship of General Jorge Videla. During the late 1970s and early 1980s, Argentina's military oversaw a regime of mass murder. Human rights groups say it was responsible for the torture, killing, or kidnap of some 30,000 people, known as los desaparecidos, the disappeared. Many were held in secret detention centers where there was systematic abduction of babies from pregnant women. Others were killed in so-called death flights, in which prisoners were thrown out of a plane at sea. Each year, the anniversary is a moment to commemorate the disappeared. Javier Milei marks the anniversary in his own way. The presidency's online accounts release documentary-style films that center the violence of left-wing guerrilla groups and question the number of victims. One of the voices featured is Agustín Laje.
Regresando a la cifra de los 30.000 desaparecidos, lo cierto es que jamás surgió de ninguna investigación.
It's part of a much larger narrative that can be heard across the country's airwaves.
O sea, no te tenés que dejar engañar con un solo relato. Hay que ver la historia con los dos ojos, no solamente con el ojo izquierdo.
Pero la única forma de tener un país mejor es contar la verdad de la historia. Ni de un lado ni del otro, ni víctima ni victimario.
A movement advocating for the so-called complete memory of the events of the dictatorship, one that reframes the repression of that time as part of a dirty war between two sides.
No podemos explicar que Montoneros, ERP, FARC y FAP mataron 1.094 personas. Eso se tiene que poder decir en la Argentina.
Lo que busca la narrativa de
What the complete memory narrative seeks to do is incorporate a historical truth that had been denied from the outset. Those who attack the complete memory narrative are the ones denying a portion of history that, for reasons of political, ideological, and economic convenience, they choose to leave out of the picture. It means recognizing that guerrilla and terrorist groups existed and that they, too, systematically violated human rights against the civilian population.
Los planes de aniquilamiento y de violación a los derechos humanos.
It's true that a few years ago it was inconceivable to talk of a dirty war or question the figure of 30,000 disappeared. And those limits have been pushed. What's acceptable speech has shifted with the arrival of this new radical right wing in power.
El golpe del 24 de marzo del 76 fue reclamado, exigido por una gran parte de la población argentina.
Today, you can find content on primetime news channels or online that trivializes or relativizes the seriousness of the dictatorship's crimes for a young audience.
In 1983, Argentina's military dictatorship came to an end, and the country led a pioneering effort to seek transitional justice. For the first time anywhere, a democratically elected government put the former generals of a dictatorship on trial. The so-called trial of the juntas, parts of which were televised, was a watershed moment. But over the years, right-wing parties began accusing liberal governments of producing a one-sided narrative about military rule. Then, in 2023, came the election of Javier Milei. The president has since slashed funding for human rights groups that work on archiving and investigating past abuses, and he has labeled education about the dictatorship indoctrination. As a result, the United Nations has warned of alarming setbacks in Argentina's historic commitment to memory, truth, and justice.
El gobierno de Javier Milei ha hecho muchas cosas.
Javier Milei's government has done many things. Funding has been cut to groups that claim to defend human rights in Argentina, but that, in reality, became implicated in corruption scandals. The government also funded educational institutions and universities that functioned as centers of left-wing indoctrination. Milei's administration began cutting funding to all of this. I believe that this aspect has generally been well received by society, insofar as there were voices that had been completely excluded from the public sphere, and that have now been able to bring another part of the truth to the table, a part that had been kept out of the discussion.
The political narrative about the 1970s dictatorship has always been contested. There was never complete consensus around that narrative. The government is trying to establish that there's a silencing or a bias when it comes to constructing the memory of that period.
Las generaciones que no vivimos los años 70 queremos conocer la historia de manera completa.
There's a whole army, one could say, of trolls and social media posters who are responsible for viralizing and amplifying this discourse.
Amplificar este discurso.
Every single country in South America endured a period of military rule, regimes that subjected their populations to state terror, often with the direct or indirect support of the United States. In Argentina and elsewhere in the region, the effort to rewrite that history, to bring another truth to the table, has too often looked like sanitizing the past, rehabilitating a fascist ideology that is no longer a cultural taboo.
No solo en Argentina.
This is not limited to Argentina. It's a much broader regional trend. Throughout the region, the left has controlled the historical narrative. In Chile, for example, there's been a reassessment of Salvador Allende's history that became a topic of discussion in recent elections. In Colombia, President Petro found himself pushed out by an outsider, Abelardo de la Espriella, who accused him of being a guerrilla fighter and a terrorist. So history persists, history continues, history carries all of its components, all of its fragments, forward into the most immediate present.
Hacia el presente más inmediato.
It's important that young people don't forget that these are absolutely extraordinary crimes, not comparable to anything in Argentine history. And those types of crimes are not called crimes against humanity for nothing. They don't have a statute of limitation.
Entonces, banalización y relativización.
So, trivializing and relativizing these crimes is dangerous because young people lose sight of the seriousness of what happened, which puts at risk the founding pact of our democracy, which is nunca más.
Nunca más. Nunca más qué.
Never again what? Never again that kind of extraordinary violence.
And finally, back to the UK and the repeated failures of the British government and news outlets there in calling out Israel for its genocidal treatment of Palestinians in Gaza, including journalists. Last week, Ahmed Washa, a cameraman for this network, was killed in an Israeli airstrike on a refugee camp just 3 months after his brother, also an Al Jazeera journalist, was killed in a similar attack. At a demonstration last week, British activists gathered photographs of 255 Palestinian journalists killed by Israel and placed them on the steps of the BBC office in Glasgow. It was their way of calling out the lack of coverage the BBC has provided for those stories, what they called the complicity and craven behavior of the UK's public broadcaster. Despite piles of evidence and conclusive findings from human rights organizations as well as the UN, Israel is still acting with full impunity. And it still will not let international reporters into Gaza to see the story for themselves.